Hi, my name is Phil Kirschner. I'm a senior expert in McKinsey's real estate and people and organizational performance practices. I am a trained workplace strategist, and I'm really excited to talk to you today about everybody's favorite topic during, unfortunately, this last 2 years, which is the future of the workplace and how to reimagine the employee experience, given all that we have been through during COVID as we look forward. So the title of my talk is just that, the future of the workplace. We'll be talking about experience, about purpose, and ultimately, hopefully a little inspiration around improvisation. And I hope this provides a slightly different perspective than what we are inundated with the news. How many days we go back? Do we go back? How do we continue working from home? But to really reinvigorate the conversation about what is possible for us as employees and with our employers. So first, I'll just tee up a couple of the bold ideas that I'll be sharing so you can keep them in the back of your mind as we go through the talk. First and foremost, I believe that the workplace of the future is going to be virtual first, but by no means placeless. Second, I think that the purpose of the post-pandemic workplace is going to be around human connection and connectivity in general. Following that, workplaces and our offices, more than ever before, need a clearly defined purpose and an activated community around that purpose. Fourth, individuals and teams need a choice architecture for the best place to work and why and when, because it is becoming very difficult to make all those decisions on our own. And finally, most of the meetings that we have are not what we would think of as moments that matter, which is to say, we need to have fewer of them in order to make all of this work better. So let's do a little history lesson. While no one ever called it this, my interpretation of the image on the left-hand side of your screen, which anyone over, let's say 30 in the audience probably feels very familiar, I think of this as the exclusivity-based workplace, which is to say I exclusively do my work in this spot, or I have to be of a certain title in order to get something of such and such a size, like a private office. But the emphasis then, no matter what you called it, was always about productivity. How productive am I in this space? It's the sort of assembly line and factory version for knowledge work. But then over the last 10 or 20 years, we in design have seen a shift towards what in the upper right is actually called the activity-based workplace, where instead of single-purpose desks and offices and meeting rooms, we have a diversity of workplace settings to meet our different needs throughout the day. We were also starting to see a so-called resumercial design trend of having our office feel a little bit more like our home. Of course, in the last 2 years, we've had that reversed, where our houses are now unfortunately starting to feel a bit more like our office. But this trend was already happening long before COVID, and was starting to really help us rethink what the workplace, both in the home or in the office, could be. And one of the challenges for your typical real estate or facilities manager is that while all of this was happening, the so-called experience economy was exploding, enabled by new technologies and hospitality feel, places around the world, even so far as an airport. So the picture on the left is Changi International Airport in Singapore, which is an amazing place to be. And I can't believe I'm saying that about an airport. But because of all of this, it created a really strong contrast to the fact that most of our offices, again, on the right here, were not that great. They weren't great before, and many of them still, unfortunately, are not that great now, which is adding to the resistance that employees have to want to return to an experience that wasn't that great before, but they didn't have a choice. I often say most offices I've ever worked in are not actually as intelligent as my home is now, between smart devices and things we can control with our phone. And that's not to say that there aren't some examples of buildings that do this well. As I say here, some buildings are actually very, very smart, and they are getting smarter by the day. The example on the left is a building called The Edge, famously in Amsterdam, which about 7 years ago was given the title the leanest, meanest, smartest, most intelligent, and most sustainable building on the planet. Very cool experiential tricks. When you book a meeting room, it will reserve you a parking space. It will recognize your car when you drive into the parking lot. You can order coffee on your phone, but you can also change the lights above your head from your phone to suit your preferences. It's really amazing. And now on the right, we have a picture of JP Morgan's new headquarters in New York City. These renderings were just released a few weeks ago, and it's going to be the first all-electric, incredibly sustainable office building in New York City, saying nothing of the level of sort of sensors and experiential design that's been put into it. So the envelope is being pushed very, very far. And it's because experience matters. Even before the pandemic, we believed that the magic happens a little bit when we are together. The onus has been on employers and on developers and owners of buildings to create environments where we want to be together. The slight sliver example here on the left is Bloomberg's headquarters in London, which is a phenomenal piece of architecture you can see with the light and the spiral. And on the right is a building also in London, multi-tenant, so this is many different companies in the same building, a building called 22 Bishopsgate. And if you read the description in the upper right and you had gone to their website and read this information about the soundtrack, the plants, the signature scent, without pictures of the lobby or an office building, you might be fooled into thinking it's some hot new restaurant in town, and that's by design. So a building like that is going to this level of experience to attract top employers, and then the employers are building out their own environments to attract the top employees, because again, the experience matters. And if I'm going to continue talking about experience, I owe it to you to define that term. There are many definitions of experience, but the one that I came to like through my own history, working mostly at WeWork for several years in a community-based workplace environment, is the events that make up the conscious past of a community, which is to say, we have plenty of great experiences by ourselves, but they tend to be better when we're with other people. The example here is one of my favorites from during the pandemic. The insurance company Humana here in the United States, based out of Louisville, which had approximately a third of its workers fully remote pre-COVID. So remote working was not new to them. But during the thick of the pandemic, when employees weren't allowed into their headquarters site, they started exploring different ways of using the outside to safely engage their workforce together. So working with the local city and event planners and some clever companies like this one in the foreground, Utbox, which will drop a portable meeting room basically wherever you need it, created this community workspace with Wi-Fi and social distancing and food and drink for their employees. And the experience was so positive, they both took it indoors, you could see in the upper right, during the colder months, and continued this kind of event center feel to give their employees a chance to be together, but also have taken lessons learned from this whole experience back into their headquarters environment and really rethinking how employees want to connect with each other and different modalities of seating and servicing to really maximize their experience. And since we've gone from experience to talking about community, I will give you a definition of that as well. Somewhat counterintuitively, it takes a lot of me to make a we. Only when I can feel safe and authentic and valued and really to be myself am I going to be in a position of being ready to connect and engage with others as part of a group. Unfortunately, in large part due to the technology that we carry, and this is not new to COVID, it is now easier than ever for us to meet, to do these virtual connections, but or sort of virtual events and meetings, but harder than ever to genuinely connect with others. You may have heard the so-called loneliness epidemic that has started with all day, every day access through our phones to social networks, and the concern that our kids will never look up from their phone. And so it's been harder than ever to genuinely connect. And by connect, I mean taking the time ritually to see the humanity in someone else. This definition I got from a former coworker and I've always loved. It's not just the one-off meetings, but how am I regularly practicing the ability to get to know someone deeper as a person? And if this definition is a little difficult to grasp, we all know what the opposite feels like. To be disconnected, to be unseen, unheard, or ultimately that you are just a number. So we know we don't like this. The question becomes how to make a workplace that helps get ahead of that. So the term that I've coined for it is the connectivity-based workplace, both physically and digitally. I think that this hybrid future flexible workplace experience has to be assessed by how connected all of its members or occupants are to, yes, the company's team and mission, vision, values, and technologies and resources, and even transit nearby, but ultimately to each other as people. So how do we do that? First, you have to build a place with purpose. Most offices don't have a good one. If you ask anyone, especially before COVID, hey, why do you have an office in Chicago? The answer might have been, because I have 500 employees in Chicago, which frankly is not a great answer. This example here is from a healthcare-oriented building recently constructed here in New York. It's called Cure. It has a brand and logo, and is a mix of hospitality space, event space, co-working, offices that would attract healthcare technology startups, and also wet and dry lab spaces to attract scientists. And if you read up about their building, it is very clear, why should you want to come here? And instead of mandating to our employees how often they need to be in the office, we have to create a place with a clearly defined purpose that they can align to and know, why should I want to go there? What is happening there? What is the value that we're creating by being here together? Second is designing for proximity. And I know during COVID, as we come out of the pandemic, proximity is a difficult word. We have been conditioned for challenges around distancing. But there's a reason that the old European cities are built the way they were, with a clear and logical town square where everybody goes to see each other as the default meeting point for everything. Many traditional offices, while they may have social spaces, they're either buried in the back or diluted into small pieces instead of engineered to be upfront and highly hospitality oriented so that you feel something when you come into that space. The picture in the upper right-hand corner is from a virtual meeting platform called Verbella. And I show it just to say, even when you go to attend a virtual event on that platform, where you may be sitting in a virtual auditorium watching a virtual speaker in front of you as a little avatar character, they still drop you into a social space, either outside or inside. You're not just put into the meeting room, because there's something intuitive that we like about seeing the buzz and the traffic of getting a feel of what's going on to a space by being in the town square. Next is to create an activated community. So that's the software above the hardware of the office that you're building. While you can't move a desk or a stairwell very well or quickly, you can change what's happening in the space. And you need a team that is responsive all the time to the needs of the community. Planning and reacting with different events, making introductions, solving problems, giving occupants a sense that someone is there who cares. This is a hospitality trick. Restaurants, hotels, we're used to this, just not in an office context. So if you want your employees to feel that experience, it has to be activated over and above the built environment. And finally, for the built space, I think the office of the future is going to be more of an event center than the office we think of in the past. You should be able to signal that me and my team, we need a room that's kind of scrappy for brainstorming for 10 people. Then we'd like lunch, and then we're going to do something social later, and have your office be able to respond with that need. We will give you that room. Don't worry which room it is. You show up, and we're going to treat you much like you might be used to experiencing at a hotel or a business center. Do you care which room it is? No, you just care that it is set up the way that you want and serviced the way that you want. So I think this will be great, but it is a terrifying proposition for most facilities teams in a traditional environment to shift their modality to operating like this. So the built environment doesn't move very fast, unfortunately, so it can be scary to think of what changes you can make today. But I'll offer you a few examples inspired by this image in a Japanese term, which is called nemawashi. It literally means digging around the roots, or if you're going to move a tree, but you should go get dirt from where the tree is going and bring it back to where the tree is today to condition it for the new environment. So there are some things that we can do, I think, to maximize our experience and the impact of the future workplace. And first and foremost is understanding the moments that matter. What times, what activities, what conditions objectively are better with higher value when we do them together in real time, either virtually or in person. Instead of, again, mandating that employees have to be in a particular place, you can motivate them and help them make the choice to be together when they know that that activity is either good for the company, good for their team, or even good for them personally. Maybe certain moments don't matter, and I should take a break or be on my own for increased focus time instead of rushing in just because. Speaking of choice, we have to empower our teams to make better choices, not just about how and when they work, but where they work. There's an explosion of platforms that are allowing people to selectively and on a transaction basis take the kinds of workspaces that they need for an hour, a day, a week, a month, you name it. The example here is a white labeled service for BP through an application that was called Meetings Booker at the time. It's now called Hubly, that lets their employees go out and select not just workspaces, but meeting and event spaces. So if they have a client need, again, I want a room shaped, with a U-shaped table and lunch and a presentation setup, and maybe even a room upstairs where my client who's flying in can stay. They can do that through a system on demand for themselves without having to go through a complex event planning process. And these choices are becoming even more important because the supply of so-called third places, something that is neither our home nor the office, has absolutely exploded through the pandemic. It was already happening before, but has increased recently. Things that are not a workplace are now becoming a workplace. The picture on the left, you can probably tell, is a gym. But the other three pictures are an old WeWork site, a hotel lobby, and a bank branch. And from my experience, it takes a minute for most people to be able to figure out which is which. And that's the point. Workplaces that are perfectly good and serviced with a hospitality mindset are going to be everywhere. So if you want your employees to be together, not only is there extra friction to make them come all the way, perhaps into something that is your controlled office, but also they may have more options to be with each other at the same time in a completely different context that suits them for the moment and where and when they have to be with others. And sort of wrapping up with 3 behavioral recommendations that make it the easiest to be digital first or virtual first. As I said, I believe that the future environment is very much not placeless, but we do have to have the intention of operating in such a way that we can be without the place and still get by just fine. Evolving our work patterns to be better operating in a virtual environment so the moments where we can be together are icing on the cake. Reading left to right, the first is visualizing our work process, taking the Post-its off the wall and onto the computer, so to speak. You should not have to be somewhere in particular or with someone in particular at a particular time to know what is going on in your team or with other teams that you interact. In the middle is embracing asynchronous communications. Gets back to my big idea that most meetings don't matter. We are abusing ourselves with Zoom fatigue and assuming that every single conversation has to be scheduled, and they don't. We're accustomed to email and now Slack and other platforms like Microsoft Teams, but there are some really incredible options out there for rich but asynchronous communications, voice messaging, video messaging, screen sharing that really allow you to use tone of voice to express what you want to someone, which is a lot of the reason that we choose to get on the phone or on Zoom, to just say something. So if you can say it instead of writing it, or show someone that you want, but at a time that is convenient for you, knowing that they can hear it at a time that's convenient for them, it will make the space in your calendar to allow you to have more flexibility about where and when you are to do other work. And finally, we have to build a culture of documentation and writing things down. If you have employees or contractors coming and going faster, needing to know how work gets done, then they've got to be able to go to all-inclusive company playbook to see not just like how to get in touch with people or how to solve problems, but how work gets done, how we communicate, how we deal with urgency, when we do and don't have meetings and under what construct. So this culture, writing it down, is really important to enabling the future of flexible work. And I will leave you on this point about improvisation, as promised at the beginning. I think this image is an inspiration to me about what the future workplace can be for a variety of reasons. First, these guys have set up shop exactly where they want. They've picked the location, no one told them where to go. Second, they have a very clear way of measuring outcomes through the jukeboxes on the ground and knowing if what they're doing is working or not. Third, I would say this group is much more diverse than most of our workforces, and that is something that we are all aspiring for. But ultimately, when you think of jazz, somebody has to set the tempo, set a baseline, set a pace for a piece, but it still gives individual musicians the ability to improvise and riff over and above that common baseline in a way that works for them. And I think that's a good model for this somewhat scrappy version of the future. We have to have consistent ways of working within our companies, and again, rules for meetings and for collaboration and what tools we should be good at, but that still gives the individual preference over the baseline to do what works for you, when it works for you, the tools and the times that work for you to be most impactful, both for the company and for your own health and well-being. So I will leave you with that, hoping that this is the sign you were looking for to change the conversation with your colleagues and your employer about the future of the workplace. And I really appreciate your time. So take these messages back. As I said, the future of work will be virtual first, but not placeless. We need to think more about choices and motivation instead of mandates, and knowing that giving ourselves more freedom in our schedule through challenging the times that we are together in real time will let us make the most of the moments that we are together for our companies and for ourselves. Thank you.